The Ants and the Grasshopper. It was a bright, crisp day in late autumn. The leaves had turned orange and gold, and the air was cool and fresh. A busy family of ants was hustling around in the warm sunlight, drying out the grain they had stored all summer long. They were marching around with their tiny legs, working like little champions. Just then, a hungry grasshopper came hopping along, looking weak and tired. He held his fiddle under his arm like a broken treasure. "Hey, friends," the grasshopper called out with a sad little smile. "Can you please share some food with me? I'm starving." The ants stared at him, surprised. "What? You didn't save any food for winter?" they asked, shaking their heads. "Well, no," the grasshopper admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was so busy making music and having fun all summer that I just forgot." "Forgot?" the ants said, throwing up their tiny arms. "We worked hard all summer gathering food." "What were you doing?" "I was playing my fiddle and singing songs." The sun was shining, and the days were so beautiful. "Who wants to work when you can dance and play?" the grasshopper replied, trying to sound cheerful but looking nervous. The ants sighed. "Playing music, huh? Well, if you spent your time dancing, then you can dance your way through winter, too." And with that, they turned their backs and went back to work, their tiny feet marching away. The grasshopper looked down at his fiddle and sighed. From that day on, the grasshopper learned a big lesson: if you want to enjoy the good times, you've got to work hard when it's time to work. Moral of the story: there's a time for work and a time for play. The Ass and the Load of Salt. Once upon a time, a merchant and his donkey, named Dusty, were traveling home from the seashore. Dusty was carrying a huge, heavy load of salt on his back. The sun was blazing hot, and Dusty's legs felt like jelly. But he trudged along anyway, his hoofs clopping against the dusty path. Soon, they reached a shallow river they had crossed many times before. Dusty stepped into the cool water, feeling a little better. But, oops, he slipped and splashed down with a mighty flop. Water went everywhere. When the merchant finally helped Dusty back on his feet, something amazing happened. The heavy load felt so much lighter. The salt had melted away in the water. Dusty trotted the rest of the way home feeling like he had wings instead of legs. The next day, the merchant loaded Dusty with more salt and off they went. But Dusty had a sneaky plan this time. When they reached the river, he pretended to slip and, splash, down he went into the water again. When Dusty stood up, the load was light as a feather. "This is great," Dusty thought, chuckling to himself. But the merchant was not amused. He knew exactly what Dusty was up to. So, the next day, he loaded Dusty with something very different: 2 huge baskets of soft, squishy sponges. Dusty eyed them curiously but shrugged. A load was a load, right? As they reached the river, Dusty grinned to himself and accidentally flopped into the water, expecting his trick to work again. But oh no! The sponges soaked up the water like crazy, and Dusty's load became 10 times heavier. He struggled and stumbled the entire way home, puffing and panting. Dusty learned his lesson: tricks don't always work, and some plans can backfire, big time. Moral: the same trick doesn't work in every situation. Sometimes you have to be smart, not sneaky. The Crow and the Pitcher. Once upon a time, on a hot, dry day, the birds were having a hard time finding water. It was so dry, even the air felt thirsty. But one clever crow, with a rumbly tummy and dry throat, spotted something that made his eyes sparkle, a shiny pitcher with a little bit of water in it. Yes! Finally, a drink, the crow chirped excitedly, flying down to it. But wait, oh no! The neck of the pitcher was too narrow, and the water was way too low. The poor crow couldn't reach it, no matter how he tried. He flapped his wings, peered inside, and stretched his beak. Nothing worked. He felt like he was going to pass out from thirst. But then, an idea popped into his head like a light bulb turning on. He looked around and found some little pebbles lying on the ground. What if I use these? He thought. One by one, he picked up the pebbles and dropped them into the pitcher with a plunk. Plunk! The water rose a little higher. Plunk! It rose even more. Plunk, plunk, plunk. At last, the water was high enough for the crow to take a big, refreshing drink. Ah, sweet victory! Phew! I'm so glad I used my brain, the crow said happily, flapping his wings. Moral of the story: when you're in a tricky situation, thinking smart and using your wits can help you find a way out. The Boys and the Frogs. Once upon a time, a bunch of playful boys were having a blast by a shiny, blue pond. They were skipping stones, whoosh, plop, whoosh, plop, making them bounce across the water like little, flying saucers. Heck yeah! Did you see that one? Shouted Timmy. I bet I can make mine skip 5 times, laughed Ben. But what the boys didn't know was, the pond was home to a family of frogs. Ribbit. And guess what? The poor frogs were having the scariest day of their lives. Stones were raining down from above like a wild, rocky storm. The little frogs hid under lily pads, shaking like jelly. But Grandpa Frog, the oldest and bravest of them all, decided it was time to speak up. He poked his head out of the water and croaked. Excuse me, kids. Ribbit. Can I have your attention, please? The boys stopped and stared. Though it's all fun and games for you, it's super duper scary for us. Your rocks are like gigantic meteors crashing into our home. Yikes! Could you maybe play somewhere else? Pretty please? Grandpa Frog pleaded. The boys felt bad. They hadn't thought about how their game was making the frogs feel. We're so sorry, Mr. Frog, said Timmy. We'll go play somewhere else. The boys waved goodbye, and the frogs finally relaxed, safe and sound. Moral: just because something's fun for you doesn't mean it's fun for everyone. Always be kind and thoughtful.